Hi, everyone. We are here today. We've got Randy Warner. He is the current product safety manager at Cavagna North America, and he was previously the VP of safety at Ferrell Gas, and he was the owner of C3H8 Consulting. He's held leadership roles at NPGA, PERC, NFPA, and he was the past chair of safety and technical training working groups. So we're gonna pick his brain a little bit today. And Brian, do you want to go ahead and start it off?
Yeah, Jackie, appreciate that. Randy, good seeing you again. Justin, looking forward to this conversation today. So, Randy, do me a favor. Just give us a quick 5-second, 5-minute bio of Randy Warner. Tell us about where you've been, what you've done.
5 second Randy Warner. Okay. Started a career very early, I guess, in the natural gas business, actually. Right out of school, spent about 10 years in a small natural gas utility south of St. Louis, Missouri. Then got the opportunity to go to start work with Ferrell Gas. Started out as a district manager, running bobtails, doing service work, etc. With Ferrell Gas. Spent over 20 years with Ferrell Gas in that career, and got to witness much of the propane industry across the entire country. And then I worked contracted on myself with my consulting company, in which I primarily had a contract with PERC and worked on a workforce development program, which turned out into being what is the apprenticeship program that NPGA conducts now. I started working with Cavagna after that, and been with Cavagna now about a little more than 6 years.
Okay. Well, appreciate the background there, Randy. Obviously, you've held a lot of leadership positions in the industry. So, my first question for you today is you've been in the industry for a long time with working with one of the majors, your own company, working with a product development supplier for the industry. What is the one thing about propane safety that has stayed consistent?
One thing that's propane safety stayed consistent. I guess I would probably say that the consistency is always the people, and that certainly it's the side of that we tend to learn from each other as well. But consistent, I guess, is just the side of that the product is a safe product in which we all, the more we can learn about it and provide is there. But in terms of just the gas product in itself, it's a very safe product in itself.
Thank you. So let me ask you the flip side of that question is what's the one thing that has changed the most?
Yeah, well, it's probably the people as well. In terms of, I mean, the one true constant of everything is always change.
Change.
But it's what we learn from that side of it. So I mean, the product itself is remained the same and consistent on that side of it. But how we use it constantly changes, as well as, I mean, tried and true from. We all know that the primary source in North America, at least, is from the residential market. But certainly with upcoming things through, whether it's through auto gas or combustion engines, and how we can use the product for other items. And then I think that becomes the side of, even to the point of using it in processing plants, and whether it was known or not, but the aerosol side of it, of using propane and aerosols for forever. Now that's kind of changed, but now we're using propane in the extraction of THC and throughout many of the marijuana processes. So yeah, it's ever changing, but the product itself, propane itself, obviously stays relatively the same. I mean, we certainly have renewable propane and things like that too, that one might say that we have advanced on, but the molecule has certainly stayed the same.
Okay. So you've worked closely with NPGA, PERC, NFPA, Missouri Propane Gas Association. How do those collaborations directly affect what happens in day-to-day operations?
So I guess if I kind of split them apart, for sure, PERC is what the industry is now using. The Propane Education Research Council is certainly the staple for education, training. I like to use the word education more so than training today. But and even to the point of where I would at least say that it's kind of creates are industrial standards with propane. Not so much that it's that we're creating the standards themselves through PERC, but certainly the side of education and training kind of sets the bar, if you would, as to what that is. And so certainly we use that education and training every day throughout the propane industry. That's not to say that NPGA and the other associations don't have other parts in that as well, but and the state associations can certainly be part of that education and training too from a state level. And usually it's the side of that they are using the PERC materials that are doing it. So fundamentally, PERC materials are where the materials are created, and then the execution of that is largely done either through the company or through the states themselves. And then if we get to NPGA, now we get into more about certainly the regulations, the rules, the laws, that sort of thing that that is applying to us. That obviously, is I hate to say it changes every day, but basically it does change every day. At the same time, it takes forever to make a change. So certainly have to be aware of those scenarios of what's happening in the industry, and how it generally starts at the state level, and then federally for NPGA, it's the side of the ever daunting task of trying to collect what's happening in all the states, so that it could be looked at more as a federal thing. Because usually it's the side of that if it starts at one state or another, eventually it's going to spread to everybody.
Okay. So, how can smaller companies stay aware of changes in regulatory compliance? Are there specific newsletters or websites, or is there something that independents or smaller marketers can use so they don't get overwhelmed with the volume of information that's needed?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I would push them the side of them first starting with their state associations, or that group of association that is applicable for their state. In that, that is generally more directed for that state or where they're located at specifically. And the involvement with that is that not only are they then the states are the ones that can give that information to them relatively easily and more consistent with what's going on with their particular area. But it's also the side of that, the states rely upon those gas marketers within that area to raise the question as to if they are seeing a problem, or they're hearing something, or they want to have additional information for that. It's led upon what the marketers' wants and needs are as well.
Okay. So, I want to switch gears just a little bit. If we're talking about safety standards, what do you think is the most overlooked safety risk in our industry today?
So, most overlooked safety risk,
Yes.
overlooked, maybe a hard one, I guess, in the sense of that, collectively, as to trying to pull that data is into as to what it's there. But I certainly would say that I think that the risk have relatively remained the same for us over the course of the years. And typically, I think that if you go with the company goes with their insurers and talks about what those risk items are, it generally it's out of gas always tops that list when it comes to the propane operations. And then slip, trips, and falls when it comes to the individual workers themselves is also another risk. So it's, I guess, that risk, depending on whether you're talking about workers themselves from a safety perspective and their actions, driving, etc., and or more propane specific in the side of out of gas, and particularly the documentation of what is done before and after an out of gas situation is always the top risks.
So, do you think that that's a people problem? Is that a process problem? Is it a technology problem? Of those three, which would be the largest area of concern for you?
Well, they all are, but I mean, it's hard, I guess, to point in a particular order if we was to order in the side of that. But
Yeah, that's a good option.
you know, um, it's behaviors probably more so than anything else. I think when it comes to out of gas scenarios, it's the side of that as a society, we're always busy, always tasked with trying to do more. It seems like we're always, if we use the word rushed, and typically that's even the case with like slip, trips, and falls and things like that. We're usually in a rush. Try to try to point out of things of that if we do the same things over and over again in terms of our process, then it becomes a habit. And generally, if we stay within those habits or in those routines, then everything is good. The bad thing of it is that when we get rushed or we try to circumvent that or we try to skip a step or something distracts us in the means that we can't do it the same way, that's generally when the incident occurs.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in process, especially when you're talking about out of gases. Like you should always respond. You should each service tech or each person that's been in the business responds in a manner, but you should have that same application every time you're responding to an out of gas call. The scenario may be different, but your approach should be the same, right? So isolate, shut off the tank, identify, leak tests, repair if you're able to, document. Like your process should be the same for each one of those. And I think that I agree with you that that's where the breakdown typically occurs is somebody gets in a hurry. It's Friday. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Hey, we got dinner date. It'll be fine. Right. I agree with you completely in the process and breaking down there.
Or the scenario you get there and there's not a friendly dog or the customer comes out and talks with you, something that provides a distraction to you that you need to, certainly you don't want to not address the customer or you don't want to not address a dog or something like that, but at the same time it's the side of that's just examples of distractions that could get you out of that routine. And even though we think that we're doing it that way, it's the side of trying to separate those items and say, hey, Mr. Customer, we'll get to you and I'll certainly get back with you, but I need to do this first, right? So that you stay concentrating on that. Don't multitask.
So kind of on the same line, Cavagna is an international company. Are there things that are being done internationally that you would like to see brought to the United States? Or are there things in the United States that may be able to translate internationally?
Yeah, so that's a good segue. Thanks for asking that question. It's probably not that there's so much one better than the other or that sort of thing, but it's the side of that things are certainly done maybe not exactly the same across the world. And so there are certainly applications in which we try to do in the side of saying, the process or something is needed here in the States, and it's certainly becoming us as a manufacturer, it's more of a global market in the sense of saying, hey, is there something else similar to this, and is it done somewhere else differently? And then not really trying to say if it's better or worse in that aspect, but where's the solution to get out with the positive outcome that we're looking for? So there's always also innovation as well. I mean, but most of that is probably coming in and around of the way either the application is being looked at or um, or it's the side of a new product would provide, a new processing means would provide an adaptation or a rework of that particular application. A couple examples of that would be, not so new, you know, overfill protection devices that have come in the last couple of decades now. But that OPDs changed the way that the valves were made in cylinders, right? So that's a process, or the Euro style connections for low emissions. Regulators are changing in that sense of that. I say emissions in the minds of that. Environmentally, we are more aware of emissions today as that. So there's processes there that change. So kind of a simple one, I guess it's been there. It's always been there for us in North America. Is that typically if something has failed or gone wrong with our system, we tend to let the gas blow, right? So think of a relief valve or a regulator. When something is there, it's going to relieve and it's going to blow that gas out, one to alert you that there's a problem, right? Whether it's an pressure issue or what that scenario is. Where the European mentality has always been to shut that flow of gas off. So more recently in the U.S. with the emissions directions towards that, some of those applications have now come into North America in the sense of that whether it was right, wrong, or indifferent before, it's just a different way of doing that now. And the side of that, yes, the relief valve or the regulator would relieve, but then it's a short release, and then we basically shut that system down to stop the flow of gas as opposed to just letting it blow.
Okay. So if you could fix one safety issue across the industry, what would it be?
So that's a good one, I guess. It's probably more about, I usually generally talk about the fact of that if I could change one thing safety wise with a person, it would be the side that I want them to create those habits, but not only create those habits, but to make safety personal, right? So it's a side of that, it's those personal decisions that we make as humans every day. If we make those actions to the point of where it's the side of that your family was beside you or with you on those kinds of things, would we still do those same kinds of actions? So I mean that may be very general in that aspect, but that's where I try to go across in the terms of creating habits, and not only creating habits but creating good habits. And it's the side of making that safety personal. It's not because the company is telling me to do it this way. It's not because Brian told me to do it this way. It's because it's what's right, and it's what I have been educated or trained to do. And if it's a risk that I'm not willing to take with my family there, then don't take that risk, right? You find another way or another solution to go about doing it.
So you had mentioned earlier that everybody's rushed. We're always in a hurry to get stuff done. So if we're in a hurry to get stuff done, how do we make sure that we take the time to develop good habits? What are some steps that you think would be reasonable and prudent for a company to take?
To ensure that they are doing it in those steps, I guess. Um,
Yeah, how do you create those good habits that are always there? Like we talked earlier about out of gas calls, like you have to have a process. How do you create that same level of behaviors when it comes to, or when you're trying to create those good habits?
Yeah. Well, parts of that, I guess, I mean, it has to be done through observation and trust with your employees, as well as knowledge of your employees' level of educations, all those kinds of things. I mean, we talk about like, skills assessments or, um, we may do things in the side of, watching somebody doing a job before they do it. All those collectively play a role. That's a difficult one as well, because generally speaking, it's the side of that there's usually a driver or service technician that maybe has more experience. Maybe they're the longest tenured person there. And so that's the person that they use to make sure that the next person is doing that. And that's a risk in itself, as if you're talking about it from the company's perspective, because how are you ensuring that that person is instructing them or doing it from that to that degree or that aspect? So it's a very difficult one, but I mean there's lots of things that are coming out there as well in the side of different types of education and training, whether it's the virtual realities and all these kinds of things that are out there. But certainly it's those things, and I'm not saying it's a one size fits all, but those things can allow you to do some of these activities and the reaction isn't the same as if you was, with live propane, etc. So that they could then create those habits in an environment in which is not conducive to another person's bad habits, I guess. So I think utilizing all of that stuff is what we have to come forth today. But yeah, it's a difficult one to ensure that your employees are actually performing and doing what you are asking them to do when there's no one around.
Well, I think that's the definition of integrity, right? Doing the right thing when nobody's looking.
Yep,
And I think
absolutely,
creating those habits,
absolutely, and that's
creating
where
those habits over time.
I mean, for the person themselves, that's where I would go in the side of that. They have to make it a personal assessment to do the right thing, to do the safety side of it. Not because the company's telling me to do it in this way, but because, knowing that if I do it the correct way, I get to go home to my family, right? I often talk about the side of, if you're in a car and you're by yourself, you may do things that are more risky than if you had your family with you, right? So should you be texting and driving? No. Would you text and drive with your family in it? I hope not. Would you text and drive if you're by yourself? Maybe, if you're rushed and pushed and everything else, right? And that's the example of the side of that, that personal assessment, right? If you wouldn't do it when your family's there, why are you doing it when they're not?
Completely agree with that statement. So, well, let's switch gears a little bit. Justin's got some questions for you about products and practical field applications. So, and then I'll be back here in just a little bit. Thank you.
Hey, Randy. Hey, man. So what I got for you? So Cavagna's launched a few new regulators and smart valves lately. And how are these improving safety and service routines in the field?
So yes, obviously. So the first one that I would talk about, a little bit of what we kind of introduced a little bit there a minute ago, just the different philosophies between what is in Europe and whatnot. So start with the regulators on that sense. And we have a regulator called the DSS7 that provides both overpressure and underpressure protection. And so in particular, this device does kind of like what I talked about there earlier, in the side of that is shutting off the flow of gas. So if we think of a typical scenario, or maybe a non-typical, not that it happens every day, but certainly one that we are aware of, is that with a standard second stage regulator, you get a tear in the diaphragm, and what happens? It's going to relieve. It's going to relieve out the pressure relief device, and it's going to continue to relieve or blow until what? Either the container runs out of gas or stops vaporizing, or someone gets there to shut off that flow of gas, right? In with this new, shouldn't say new, but this rethinking of what we have there, is that the DSS7 with overpressure protection, it senses the downstream pressure, it senses the side of the relief valve opens, and then immediately after that, the pressure builds ever so slightly, and it slams shut off, cutting the flow of gas off at the inlet of the regulator. So it happened, but then it shut off the flow at the inlet of the regulator, creating what I would call an interruption of service, as opposed, but it shuts off that flow of gas. So different mentality thinking there. Overpressure protection devices have been around in the U.S. for quite some time. However, it's been the philosophy to kind of let things blow here in the U.S. And so this really kind of took over within the natural gas companies, in that the natural gas companies are now trying to eliminate those kinds of releases of gas. So and they're having to do things in terms of paying fines and assessments of how much gas that they're releasing in those scenarios. So they're really looking at this technology that allows that shut off. So it makes you aware that it's there, but it's shut off. So if pretty much everything that we have developed when it comes from the gas, from the propane side, has originated in the natural gas sector, right? And so there's lots of people, and there are little differences in operations. Obviously, natural gas is lighter than air, propane's heavier than air, so we have different scenarios. But it was always the side of, in the natural gas industry, just let it blow and it's going to lift up in the air, and then so not to shut off that supply of gas, because if you shut off that supply of gas, you're going to interrupt services from the customer's perspective, right? So, and obviously with natural gas, that could be hundreds or thousands of people from that. But now, obviously, as we go along, it's the side of it's not worth that risk of letting it continue to blow. So now to shut it off. So those same philosophies have kind of been brought into the propane side, which obviously usually with us, it's, container and one customer, but still that one customer is still the kind of same scenario. Propane didn't really maybe like it so much in the side of that we would have trips that would cause service calls that weren't maybe necessarily warranted or identified by having these types of devices, where now it's more about the release, the emissions, that sort of thing. So these devices allow us to shut off that service of gas. Same thing happens with the under pressure protection in the side of that it's still sensing the downstream pressure. The scenario that I use here is what we talked about earlier, was the out of gas, and this probably has maybe a little bit more relevant to the propane side than even the overpressure in the side of that. What typically happens in an out of gas scenario. It's early in the morning hours. Gets the coldest temperature. The tank is low on the amount of propane it's in, and we stop vaporizing, right? And so then the appliances shut off, and so they get up in the morning, and we don't have gas, and so the customer calls in and says we're out of gas. The delivery driver gets out there 9, 10 o'clock in the morning to make a delivery to the tank, and not that they don't want to do a leak check, but it's always these things. Now the sun's come out. Now it's warmed up the container. Now we have a pressure in the tank. And so if we have pressure in the tank, we don't do a leak check because it wasn't out of gas, right? And so those decision makings and that side of it is there. I shouldn't say every day, but you guys know as well as me, that's a decision that the drivers have to make all the time. And so with the new regulator, not trying to make the decision for them, but it's a mechanical device that senses that low pressure. It's going to slam shut. It's going to cause that interruption of service. And in doing so with that interruption of service, we've caused the out of gas. So it's a mechanical device that is assisting them in making that decision. Now the driver gets there, it's been shut off. It has to be manually reset. They can do their leak tests, that sort of thing. And then once they're complete, they repressurize the regulator and go on down. So we certainly call it the safest regulator out there, and that's because it's a mechanical device. It's going to shut off the flow of gas at the regulator, not allowing any flow on into the house.
All right, so I guess a follow-up to that would be any products you think could be especially helpful for smaller propane companies.
Yeah, and that one kind of hits there right there on top, right? So
Yeah.
and I generally say, I mean, I haven't seen this, but I would almost guarantee them that if they go to their insurance provider and ask them what their biggest risk is, the insurance provider is going to say out of gas scenarios, and it's always going to be the side of that insurer provider is looking for what, and Justin, you know this, right? The documentation as to what they did. How did they know whether it was out of gas or wasn't out of gas? So I have to believe that the insurance providers themselves, knowing that there's a device like this out there that could assist them in that way, I would think it would be. I mean, I don't know, but you would think it would be on the side of that they would be more apt to say, okay, oh, you've got this regulator in here now that's providing you this mechanical assist on that's helping us reduce this risk, right? So you would certainly think that it would be plausible that would be a discussion that as a gas marketer should have with their insurer to say, hey, we're doing these steps to reduce our risk, which could be beneficial to them, not only from the risk that's fact, but then also their insurance rates as well.
Yeah, that sounds like only upside to me. Pretty cool design, actually. But so now when you get to, let's say, technology adoption, right? We know how that is, how it gets tough, right? So what would be your advice for owners trying to get their field guys on board with newer tools? Now, whether it be digital valves, sensors, or the smart regulators, you know how some of these, I'm in that class now, the older guys that don't want to change.
Yep. Nope. Absolutely. So yeah, we see this. I shouldn't say we see this all the time, but we see this all the time, right? And I usually say it's on the side of that they just have to be shown how it works. So physically taking, a regulator apart or taking a valve apart in the means of, showing them how it works. And even with newer technology, sometimes it's not real easy to show how, electronic sensors work or that sort of thing. But if they see how it works from that side of it, and then being able to be maybe demonstrated or shown, put it in a test environment, put on a test bench where they can see how it's working from those kinds of things. That's when I see the light bulb kind of go off with these guys. Of that, they have always been convinced that, hey, this is the way a regulator works, and yes, they're right in the sense of that, the basic principles of how a regulator works, anybody regulators work is relatively the same. There are just little nuances that are differences between some of those applications. So that's what I find the best approach, particularly with tenured service techs, and that is that when these new applications come, is just let them see how it works, take it apart. We certainly are willing to do that with any of our products as a manufacturer as well. But that's what I find usually the best way. If they understand how it works, they're more apt to use it than just using it because someone told them to.
Yeah, I'm on board with you there because people that are in the service techs, whatever, they're very hands on. If they know why and how, then they get their buy in. So yeah, I'm with you 100% there. What would you say the must have tools or equipment for every small propane company should invest, especially for safety and compliance?
Yeah, well, and I mean there are obviously lots of tools out there. I struggle a little bit on the sense of that, like compliance tools, all those kinds of things. And does compliance make you safer? Written articles on these discussions before, and I've always been on the side of that. Compliance is a part of it, all of those kinds of things. And there's certainly all kinds of widgets that are out there today that are available to do a lot of these things. When it comes to physical tools, I think, we've been talking about it, but certainly the new technologies with overpressure and underpressure protection on the regulator side is maybe not a tool itself, but it's certainly a tool within the system that if I was a startup company and I was investing, that would be the first thing that I would invest in.
Yeah, yeah, I don't see the downside to that. Those protections in that regulator. It's actually pretty cool. Huh. All right, so I know you've been a big advocate of practical training. So not just throwing a manual at somebody and hoping for the best. So what do you think makes training actually stick?
So yeah, that one's a tough one too, and it's really can be the processes can be different depending on the employee, and so I mean not all people learn exactly the same way with everybody, but so I mean I think it's the side of that you have to be adaptable, right? And you have to be willing to adapt that training to the individual. So, and what I mean by that most of the time is the side that, a lot of people can learn from reading or watching a video or that kind of thing. And then other people have to be shown, you know, hands-on practical before they do it. And I think there's a mix in all of that, right? But what the direction behind that in the terms of, how much time does one spend in one particular area or not, that's where you have to be a little bit flexible with the audience in which you are training or educating on. Granted, I know that that's not always practical, and so usually it's the side of that we try to say, okay, we're given adequate time to do all of those steps, and so it's all of those steps combined that create the education of that person. And I really go back to the side of that, the owners and managers of those locations have got to be, the administrators of training programs and be aware of what it takes for that employee to be knowledgeable. That is, I think, probably the key thing that we've done in terms of today's education process is that, it's not PERC's responsibility to educate the employee. It may be PERC's responsibility to create the curriculum, but the employee owners, the managers, the administrators of those programs are the ones that are responsible to know whether it gets relayed to that employee.
Yeah. Yeah. Good one. So that's a pretty good segue in this next. So, since COVID, everybody, the virtual training, that's when it kind of kicked off, started everything, right? So what's your take on that remote or virtual training for, like, say, field staff? And what do you think, can be effective, or is hands-on always king?
So again, it's kind of a blend there for sure. And I talked about it just real briefly earlier in the sense of that, let's take e-learning first, and then I'll talk about virtual reality stuff as well. But take e-learning or the electronic, the e-learning and that side of it. The thing that's there from that is that we can be very consistent in what the message or what the processes are for that employee. So, it's not the side of that Brian's telling them one thing, Justin's telling them another, Randy's telling them another, because we're three trainers out there doing it. If you're following the curriculum, it's everybody gets the curriculum, the same curriculum. And that's that consistency that we talked about, at the very beginning is certainly there. Granted, it's the side of that not everybody can learn in that way. So some people, need a little bit more structure or a little bit more fed to them, whether you have to read it to them or whether you have to show them on that side of it. So being that flexibility there. So, I see it as a tool. I think it's a very good tool in the side of that we can provide very consistent processes and methods. And so granted, it's only good if the person that's doing it actually is the one that, that's doing it in that same way and is bought in on that. But otherwise, if you wind up with even 2 or 3 trainers, you wind up with 2 or 3 different training programs, right? Because we're each going to do it a little bit different. So you don't have that consistency, even if you think you do. Virtual reality stuff is certainly virtual reality is a very good tool, particularly for the propane industry, in my opinion, in the side of that we can do those tasks that could put them in a hazardous condition or environment without putting them in a hazardous environment. So even something as simple as lighting pilot lights, you now can do that. And I know, even for us, maybe that aren't as, maybe we're more tenured in the sense of that, not used to that and that side of it. But, you can take us guys, we can take us and put us in that virtual reality. And I guarantee you, when we don't do it right and that flashes on that video, you're going to jump back, right? And so I think the experience is certainly there, but it's the ability to go in and be able to do it again repetitiously, to build those habits and not put yourself in that hazardous environment. And I'm sure I've done, we've done regulator boards with air and all that kind of stuff, and that's how we used to do it in the sense of, so that we wasn't in a hazardous environment. And then we tell them about flashes or we tell them about this, right? But until you get the hairs on your arms singed or your eyebrows singed, and hopefully that's all that's occurred on that sense. The light bulb really doesn't go off there, right? And then, so virtual reality allows us to do that in what I think is very exciting thing to be able to put people through and not having them in that that hazardous environment.
Does Cavagna offer? Do they have any tools or resources that you'd recommend?
So, certainly we have tools and resources of training and education for our, particularly to our products themselves. We almost always exclusively do that through our distributor network. So that's typically how we are doing it from a classroom perspective. But certainly there are things that we have out there. We can provide our websites and things like that too, that provides information on our products.
Cool. All right. Thank you, sir. Brian?
Well, Randy, first off, I'd like to say thank you for the way that you phrased the fact that we've been doing this for a long time, that we're tenured, as opposed to just calling us old. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for that. Uh, Kind of on that same vein, what's the one challenge that you think smaller or independent businesses are not prepared for, but they need to be?
So yeah, this is that big one, I guess. What I think that they're not prepared for, and I don't have the answers to for sure, but is AI. It's the artificial intelligence is coming rapidly, faster than I think that any of us are there, as well as I think it has the potential to provide us all kinds of a very positive tool, if you would, I guess, in the sense of, and I think that we need to think of it in that way. It's a tool that's available to us, right? But to do analytics and to do projections, data, all those kinds of things, that's, I guess, probably where I fall into in terms of from a safety perspective is where it's at. But in terms of the propane marketer, this is going to change the way that we just do business. I mean, it just is.
Yeah, I would agree with you. We see a little bit of AI integration today, but I think the opportunity for the industry in general is pretty significant. Now, where I think the advantage that people in the propane industry have is it's still a very physical career field. A computer is not going to be able to go pre-trip or trup and make a delivery. And in some respects, I think that we as an industry need to expand on that, because Microsoft's talking about reducing their coding by 80%. So if you're in that career field and you know that 80% of those positions are going to go away, you should be concerned. Versus in our industry, yes, technology will be able to help us, and we'll be able to integrate technology into, maybe some mobile applications or routing and dispatching or some financial applications. But the physical side of the business is not going away. And it's going to be a career field that I think people will be able to be successful in for a long time.
Certainly, when we talk about that, the product you can't get propane in a container without, having a bobtail or a pump or a process. There certainly is that physical aspect to it for sure. But I think there are lots of applications out there that we haven't figured out yet. There are lots of things with, say, again, hazardous environment. So leak condition, you're on a leak call. Is it now that, we can, the service or bobtail driver could have a drone that then goes up and could identify, through all these other different applications. And I'm kind of, don't know that it's there, but there are all these concepts that are out there, right? That are able, through heat seeking and through different mitigations of gases and sensors and things like that. Again, the tools that are out there for us, that then it can compute all that stuff and not put our employees and customers in a hazardous environment, right? Even and certainly this is things that everything that we use, the trucks, the vehicles, all that stuff, what you're talking about, in terms of efficiencies and everything else. But the trucks have all kinds of data. We've talked about this forever. You and I have talked about it forever as well. Is that we want to collect this data, and yet what do we do with it when we get it there? Well, now we're at the point of where we've collected a whole bunch of data. Now we have the possibility of AI being able to actually go through all that data very quickly and provide us some outcomes. So think of it in the terms of, the bobtail, that truck is computing now, the acceleration, the deceleration, the braking, the pumping, all of that stuff, all that data is out there. And yet, we don't necessarily compute it back into what might be useful information in the terms of being proactive instead of reactive. We're almost always reactive, right? So if the bobtail gets involved in an incident, then we're pulling that information. Then we're looking at that information, right? We're not looking at that information beforehand because it's just too much, right? It's just too much data in that side of it. So now it's a side of that, with AI, maybe there's some predictive things that could happen that would allow us to be more predictive instead of reactive.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, again, the AI, I think that's the one thing that as an industry we're not necessarily prepared for, but there's lots of tools that I think eventually, well, in the short term, we'll be able to leverage to improve our operations. So,
Yep,
well,
absolutely.
I've only got a couple more questions. Go ahead.
No, I said absolutely. Correct.
So I've only got a couple more questions left for you. The first one is, what's the best piece of advice you ever received? And who did you get that advice from?
So yeah, that's a good one too. As always, I guess the one that I kind of come back to more times than not is the one that be true to yourself and trust your gut. And I guess some of that kind of comes back to the side of that. If you are from a safety perspective, is that self making it personal from that part of it. But usually your gut can tell you whether or not you are whether you should really be doing something in the matter that you're doing it, right? So that's the one that I probably come back to more times than not.
Well, and I think that ties into the conversation we had a little bit ago about out of gases and processes, right? If something is nagging at you when you get home about a task that you just completed, you should just go back, because something that's there for a reason, like trust your gut, right? So who gave you that piece of advice?
So a gentleman by the name of Steve Wombold, who is now the CEO of Letterman's at Propane. But yes, Steve's the man when it came to that.
I think he's an up and comer. I think I've heard that name in a couple of different scenarios, but maybe he'll be able to do some good things in the industry in the future.
Absolutely.
So the last one I have for you is, you have a young tech that just entered the industry. What is your one piece of advice that you would give them to be successful?
Yeah. So again, it's going to be that commitment to making it personal, being a personal commitment of safety, and whether or not you would do your action with your family there, no matter what it is. Giving a couple examples out here to where it's at, but it's the side of that if you can really commit to yourself of making in your personal life that safety commitment, and what is that risk, and we can compute this pretty quickly, and I know it's easier said than done, but I think if people really start thinking about that, use the mentality behind texting and driving or speeding, those kinds of things whether you're, eating while you're driving, I know those are a lot of driving aspects, but those are all things that we do with a risk associated with them, right? And if we start thinking about what those risk assessments are with those little things that we maybe do every day, then it's the side of, if we can get in that habit of making that assessment on any activity that we're doing, what's the risk? Where's it at? And and am I willing to take that risk, or am I willing to do that activity if my family was here with me as well? And if they pull that together and throughout, they will have a very long and safe career out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue into PEP, right? So the new PEP training process through PERC. There's actually a really nice segment in there about doing a personal safety assessment. I think that if everybody in the industry were to take the time to do a personal safety assessment at virtually every interaction, we could reduce a lot of instances, and that includes slip, trips, and falls.
Absolutely.
So, Randy, that's the questions that I had for you today. Justin, anything else you've got for wrapping up?
No, I am actually good. Thank you, Randy.
Randy, any parting thoughts?
So, thank you guys. I appreciate the time and good conversation here today.
If you will send us the link to some of your Cavagna training materials or even your website, we'd be glad to put those in the comments. And when we get this thing posted, we'll make sure that information's out there.